What's up, you damn gorgeous and beautiful gamers? Welcome back to role-playing games. This is Mariel Corner in the internet where we like to discuss about RPGs. Now, before anything else, this is the most broken build that I have been able to make. But before that, I would very much like to tell you about the build in itself. If you're not interested in that, if you want the stats, if you want the playstyle, if you want the equipment, spells, so on and so forth, I will have timestamps in the video so that you can jump to whatever part of the video, but for now in this intro I should pretty much like to focus myself to tell you why I believe that this is the most broken build ever made on Elden Ring. So, Elden Ring has been out there for quite a while now. We know what's broken. We know that Elden Ring provides you with tools to be as efficient as possible or as broken as possible. FromSoft team said from prior to release that the game would be as hard on you as you would allow it to be. There are different kind of tools, combinations and builds that you can make to make this thing more viable to you. This case scenario, this point in time, we know what's broken. We know what works and we know what doesn't. And we know which ones of those tools, again, are so goddamn broken. We know so far, for example, that status ailments such as bloodlust is very goddamn powerful. Double seppuku, it's very goddamn powerful. Rivers of blood. We know that frost, for example, provided that you use it correctly in a proper build, it's very goddamn powerful as well. That not to mention Scarlett Rot. Scarlett Rot is so goddamn powerful, it's the king of the cheese. You can pretty much Scarlett Rot the 80% of the bosses and then run around the battlefield and let that hell part of the boss just be diminishing as time passes by. So we also know that Bloodhound Step, provided that you pair it up with a very high damaging build, it's also going to be so goddamn broken. So that is precisely why this build is so hugely powerful, overpowered, cheesy and broken as it can get, because I took all of the things that we know so far to this point that are broken, and I clustered them up in a single unique build, which is this one that I am going to show you right now. So that being the case, that being said, let's jump over to the next section of the video, which is the stats for the build. We'll talk about that, the playstyle and why I clustered everything up in this build later on. So we are indeed going to be using as many tools as possible, which brings me to my very first point. With Bloodhound Step, you're likely not going to get hurt that much. You have the capacity to be avoiding enemies' attacks as much as possible, especially if you're an experienced player. But we're using that 60 points. We have the self cap on our health. We actually... hold on, we don't. I'm using Radagon Soul Seal. So, the base stats, right now it seems to be 55, but ideally it's not. It's 60 because of Radagon Soul Seal. We have the self cap on our health bar, not for us. We have it for the Mimic tier. The Mimic tier is going to be the tank of the build with the use of one of the talismans that we have on the build. So, do have that in mind. We're actually going to be using as much as possible Bloodhound Step, Scarlett Rot, Rotten Breath, and it's going to be highly consuming on your FP, so it's nice to have right here. Endurance, you have ideally 30 points in endurance. You don't need that much, but at the end of the day, since I have already self-capped my Dexterity, which is an 80, thanks to talismans and crystal tears, we have it in 65, ideally that's going to be 80. We already have a self-cap, and since we are a 150 build, I might as well play some extra points in endurance to be able to use the desired armor that you like to use with this build. You don't actually need to use a specific armor set for this thing. You have enough endurance to be able to be versatile and use whatever you like to use. Faith and Arcane. Faith and Arcane, we have right there. Those are mostly the result of my character class. You don't need to have them that high. You can play some of those points in other places. Ideally, you only need as much Fate and Arcane to be able to use this specific spell, which is one of the cheesiest things that we have on our build. Faith 15, Arcane 12 to be able to use Rotten Breath. The damage, we're not interested in that. We're not dealing damage with this thing. Well, partially, I guess. We are interested in landing Scarlett right into the enemies, thanks to this thing, but we'll talk about that in the gameplay section of the build, but for now let's focus ourselves on the equipment section of the build. So our main weapon for the build is going to be a Kin Uchigatana with Bloodhound Step. That's one of the main aspects of the build. Bloodhound Step, it's cheesy as hell. Granted, a double seppuku, it's quite better, it's very overpowered, but since double seppuku would not allow us to use Bloodhound Step, we're actually doing it this way. We have a Kin Uchigatana, and thanks to our 80 Dexterity, thanks to our Crystal Tia, thanks to Radagon Soul Seal, we're able to reach that Dexterity soft cap, so it's going to give us 600 AR when it comes to the base damage, as you can see right here. But the AR of the weapon, it's not going to be our main means of dealing damage. We're actually more broken and versatile than that. I'll talk about that later, but for now, precisely, another little disclaimer, we don't have any points into Arcane, even though that we're focusing ourselves on Blood Loss build up. But the thing is that Arcane, we don't have any scaling on Arcane on neither of our weapons, and since we don't have scaling on Arcane, the Blood Loss build-up is not going to be scaled. For Arcane to scale your Blood Loss build-up, you need to have Arcane scaling. Since we don't, well, there's that. Like I said, we're actually building our character a little bit differently, but it'll make sense as soon as I tell you a little bit more about it. Called the Uchigatana. So, ideally what we're doing in here is that we have two status elements. We have 105 Frost build-up, we have 38 Bloodlust build-up on our left Uchigatana, we have 45 Bloodlust build-up on our left Uchigatana, but we are also using Blood Flame Blade, as you can see right there. Blood Flame Blade, with our current incantation scaling, it's not going to be amazing, it's not going to give you that much, it's not going to be that amazing, it's going to give you roughly 50 point more damage, which in comparison to, for example, if you would have a nice incantation scaling and good faith or intelligence, depending on the spells, you could potentially have a 300 more damage on the spell that you use. But we're using this thing mainly for the extra 50 points into Blood Loss build-up. So ideally we have roughly 140 Blood Loss build-up, which is amazing. So what is happening in here? What is going to happen in here? I'll try to have some footage as well in here, but the Blood Flame Blade, it's going to restart the cold build-up. Cold build-up, what it does is when it procs, when it triggers, it gives a debuff on the enemy. We don't actually want that. We are more interested in the chunk of health it takes away. So as soon as you hit a frozen enemy with Blood Flame Blade, it's going to restart it, and you can frozen him again. So what's happening in here is that you have your Bloodlust build-up, your Frost build-up, and they are both stacking onto one to another, and you're pretty much going to be lasering through the enemies because you have two status elements. Also, before you start any fight, you're actually going to cast Rotten Breath. But again, we'll talk about that later on the gameplay section of the video. For now, let us focus on the Crystal Tiers, Talismans, so on and so forth. So first and foremost, one thing that you will have to do is keep this as clean as possible. Do not have any more talismans than the ones that I have right here. The reason for that being is that we are using Shabriris' Woe to be able to turn our Mimic Tier into a tank. We'll talk about that again on the gameplay section of the video. But the talismans that we use, Tree's Favor +2 to give our chunkiness, more chunkiness to our Mimic Tier. Kindred of Rods Exaltation, as soon as you rot an enemy, it's going to increase your DPS, as well as Lord of Blood's Exaltation. You're actually going to be triggering that blood loss as much as possible, and extra 20 levels from Radagon Soul Seal is always amazing. For our Flask of Wondrous Physics, we have Green Burst Crystal Tia, which is going to temporarily boost stamina recovery speed, which is amazing because you're going to burn stamina like a maniac with this build. Dexterity, not Crystal Tia. This is what is going to give you 10 extra points into Dexterity, hence giving you that 80 soft cap. Also, do remember that with our Cold Ichikatana, we also have a B scaling in Dexterity. While the base damage is not amazing to be leveraging that B scaling Dexterity that much, you do have quite a healthy amount of damage. Ideally, they are not too far from one another. The first one is better because it doesn't split the damage, it's just purely physical. But as you can see, we have 555 on our AR for the second katana. And that being the case, well, once we use our Dexterity Crystal Tia, it's actually going to increase that damage even further than that. It's going to be like 600 and 570, something like that. But again, let's jump now over to the gameplay section of the build. So, every time that you enter into a boss fight, what you're going to do is that you want to have Shabir's Woe equipped. That way, when you summon your Mimic Tia is going to have Shabir's Woe. It's going to draw the enemy's attention, which is going to make him a tank. While he is using this thing, while he is tanking the enemy, you're going to take the time to place Scarlett right into the enemy. Again, since you don't have that much incantation scaling, you're not going to be dealing that much of damage with this thing, but the damage, base raw damage, is not important. What you want to have is that Scarlett right onto the enemy, because it's going to melt away percentages little by little, so as you place some more DPS into the boss is going to be dying slowly, and more than slowly. Scarlet Rod is actually heavy, real heavy against bosses. Also, as soon as you take away the Shabir's Woe, you're going to change it again for Lord of Blood's Exaltation, and then you place Scarlet Rod, but before that you're actually going to use Blood Flame Blade. Again, when you use Blood Flame Blade, the cold stacking up, it's going to reset. So, what's happening in here is that it's just the damage is growing potentially and exponentially by skyrocket distances. Because again, the most important thing about freezing an enemy is the capability to be able to reset that status ailment. Blood Flame Blade is going to reset it, so ideally you're triggering 2 status ailments onto the bosses. Also, your your Mimic Tia, it's very goddamn powerful, it's very strong, it's very tanky because it has so much health. Since you have soft cap on bigger, this thing is going to be a goddamn tank even post nerf. So your Mimic Tia is contributing to your cold, to your bleed, and ideally, as you can see, it's just broken as hell. You have the best of the brokenness of the world of Elden Ring in one, all clustered up in a single specific build. So again, just to recap, you make your Mimic Tia into a tank thanks to Shabir's Woe, then you switch back your talisman, then you place Blood Flame Blade, and once you have placed Blood Flame Blade into your weapon, you place Scarlet Rod into the boss, and that is when you start fighting. You have Bloodhound, what's the name of that? Bloodhound Step. You have Bloodhound Step to be able to be running away, heal as much as possible. The iframes on that thing is just goddamn disgusting, and trust me on this one, once you get to the Elden Beast, you're going to destroy that thing like you have no idea. So, that's pretty much everything for the build. If you enjoyed the video, if you liked the video, then please do me a favor and subscribe to the channel and like the video before you close the door. And also remember that if no one has told you today that you're a gorgeous and beautiful person, you are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. Have a beautiful day, and I'll be seeing you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Goodbye.